Well, good evening to everyone. Today, we are continuing our cycle. I believe everyone here has already attended before. Is anyone here for the first time? If you are joining us now, you are very welcome. To briefly explain the purpose of this cycle, we are exploring all the chapters of a book called Seeking Wisdom by Professor Sri Ram. He was a philosopher of the last century who passed away in 1973, that is, a contemporary thinker, quite recent. And since it is one of the best books I have ever read in my life, I added it to my list of books I would like to give talks on, not about the entire book at once, but chapter by chapter. Because this way, you can delve into the intricacies and details of each chapter. A lecture about an entire book is always a very limited sampling. And this is a book that is worth chewing over, chapter by chapter. Also, to encourage you to read it, because it truly is a book worth your while. For those who are coming for the first time, do not feel shy, even though we are already on the 13th chapter. Because, in fact, this book is a compilation of lectures. So, all the chapters are independent. It was assembled from lectures that he gave on various occasions. Therefore, each chapter can be followed without the need for any previous lecture. Today, I will talk about a very interesting topic. It is always quite metaphysical. Metaphysical, it has certain elements. And for this reason, I wanted to create this series. Precisely because his way of expressing himself is sometimes a bit metaphysical, symbolic, it can make reading difficult for someone who is just starting out. So today, he will talk about a very interesting subject, which is the precepts of the masters. Imagine the following. Throughout the history of humanity, all those great masters who possessed wisdom have always enjoyed teaching how they reached that point. Those who possess knowledge like to teach. They like to share what they know. He will speak specifically about a tradition from Tibet, where there is a book called the Precepts of the Masters, in which an effort is made to compile these teachings into 10 steps. The path that a human being must take in order to rise from their current, average level to a degree of human wisdom. In other words, to move from ignorance to wisdom. There are certain measures, certain steps that must be taken. Now, Sri Ram says that these 10 steps, for the modern Western person, he lived quite recently, would be too much. We wouldn't even understand what they are asking for there. So he selects only 3, just the first 3. And even so, we still feel somewhat confused about how to put them into practice. But, in any case, it is palatable. We are able to follow along. And this chapter was a lecture he dedicated precisely to this, to speak about the first 3 steps for a person whose life goal is to seek wisdom, for someone who is not content with the current level at which their consciousness is vibrating, who wants to move beyond the step they are on, who wishes to reach a level closer to the human ideal, in other words, for an idealist. So, he will begin by talking about the author in quotation marks, the translator who brought this work to the West, this individual, who is Evans Wentz. He became quite well known, at least among those interested in these Eastern literatures, because he was the first to translate it for the West. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Bardo Thodol, is a book that is among my favorites. I am very fond of it, and it is one of humanity's classics. He, together with this Lama Kazi Dawa Samdup, the 2 of them came together. And both of them were knowledgeable. Well, evidently, Evans Wentz did not know much Tibetan, but the Lama was well versed in English. So, the 2 of them communicated as best they could and produced the first translation, in 1919, of the Bardo Thodol, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, a remarkable work, into English. Naturally, it must have been a very challenging endeavor. In fact, Carl Jung made extensive use of this book. One of the editions I like most features a preface by Jung. He was extremely fond of this book. It is truly fascinating. Now, what does Sri Ram have to say? These Tibetan treatises, the Bardo Thodol was one of them. He translated 6 more books into English. You will soon see that shortly after this photo, the Lama passed away, and he continued doing translations on his own. Evans Wentz was an American scholar who studied in England, traveled the world, and eventually settled almost entirely in Tibet. So, after the Lama passed away, he still translated 6 more treatises. One of them was this one, the Precepts of the Masters. And now Professor Sriram will draw attention to this matter, to how difficult it is to take a language like Tibetan and translate it into English. Think of 2 things that belong to entirely different universes. English, I don't need to go into detail with you about how utilitarian it is, especially the English of our times, which is no longer the English of Shakespeare. It is a utilitarian language. It is very simplified, and sometimes it is very difficult. Even from Portuguese to English, we already encounter some difficulties in expressing certain concepts. A little more complex, more metaphysical ones. I can only imagine what it must be like from Tibetan. Tibetan is a language that contains a wealth of deeply spiritual treatises. I can't imagine what it must be like to translate that into English. He says, look, a language expresses the way a people think. So, when you transfer something from one language to another, there is always the risk of misunderstanding. And there is always the risk that this misunderstanding may lead to complicated consequences. He goes on to talk, for example, about when the Tibetan concept of nidana, which is the Indian nirvana, was translated for the West. It was rendered as nothingness, as extinction. This gave rise to a kind of rampant materialism, because if people are going to die and simply cease to exist, why make the effort to live a moral life or strive for an existence closer to the ideal? And he says, look, it is absurd, this tradition that has taken hold of interpreting nirvana as nothingness. It has absolutely nothing to do with the Tibetan concept. This has influenced people to think in a way where life is seen as heading toward emptiness. This has shaped mentalities. In other words, it has led to practical consequences. He says that when you do not understand an Eastern concept, do not try to force it to fit something you already know. Skip it. Set that one aside and say, one day I will understand it. Do not try to force the bardo to fit into something familiar, because that never works. So, if I do not understand, I actually have a habit that, at times in my life, sometimes it has worked, other times it has not. When something is very complicated and I truly do not understand it, I memorize it. One day, it will click. Some things have clicked, others never have, but in any case, they are there. But he says, do not force things to interpret them in the way you understand. That does not end well. So, he says, even this book, with all of Evans Wentz's good intentions, contains some inaccuracies. So, he is going to filter and highlight what is interesting in this book. Be careful with definitive interpretations. And you have no idea how many of our ideas in the West were born from misunderstandings of Eastern traditions. There are quite a few, indeed. I have come across several of them in the classroom. There are not just a few. Well, continuing on, he will say that Buddhism, the Buddhist tradition, Tibet is Buddhism, Mahayana mixed with the local Bonpo tradition. Buddhism, my friends, is a fascinating religion. Because wherever it goes, it blends with what is already there and takes on a unique character found nowhere else. It spread everywhere and mixed with Shintoism, Taoism, Confucianism, and Bonpo. And wherever it has been, it has created its own distinct identity. So, Tibetan Mahayana Buddhism, with its various schools, not just one, but several, has a very distinctive character. And one of the interesting things about this Buddhism is its tendency to create categories for everything. 7 steps for you to progress, 7 things that prevent you from advancing, 13 mental obstacles, 14. And so on. He says, I hope no one ever asks me why these numbers exist, because I have absolutely no idea. But Buddhism is full of these categories. And one of the categories he chose for this talk was precisely the 10 requirements for walking the path. The path to overcome samsara, the wheel, the act of going in circles, yoga, as he calls it, is to free oneself, to reconnect. Yoga has a meaning very similar, and yug, which means link or union, is much like our word religion, from religio, religare, to reconnect, to unite heaven and earth, to bring together the spiritual and the material worlds. So, in truth, these 10 precepts are a way to prevent a person from walking in circles, which is samsara. Instead, they guide one's steps toward the fullness of the human condition, toward fullness, toward wisdom. And now he will speak a little about this treatise. It's very difficult, perhaps. I am not very good at searching for things on the internet. So, maybe one of you might find it, perhaps in Spanish. Only know it in English. It's a small treatise. Just imagine what it must be like, what it means to try to understand a treatise of this kind, poorly translated into early 20th century English. I think it would already be difficult to understand in Portuguese, but that's what we have, as far as I know. So, he will speak a little about the precepts of this book. Well, the first thing he will mention is an initial recommendation from this book, from the Precepts of the Masters. They say the following: is there something, because it is not wrong for a person to fear pain or to enjoy pleasure, but is there any pain or pleasure for which you would give up your principles, to flee from it or to chase after it? There is. That binds you, that enslaves you. Be careful with that. It is not about making a person into an ascetic who enjoys no pleasure at all. It is about not making him a slave to desire or a man in panic before pain. Because he is not able to stay on his path, to uphold his principles, every time these elements arise. So, that which you do not master is mastering you. Jung spoke about this. There you have created a bond by which you are enslaved. He said that if a person does not consciously create means to dissolve this bond, life will do it. And generally, these means involve complicated practical situations, situations of trial. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, a great philosopher, used to say, "You must be upright or be made upright." In other words, that old saying from our grandmothers, right? Either you go willingly or you go unwillingly. There is no other way. Either a person overcomes and severs these bonds through reflection, or life will take it upon itself to corner them and create trials. That which enslaves you must be extinguished. There is absolutely no possibility otherwise. So I may enjoy something, but between my principles and that thing, I am faithful to my principles. This does not mean that I am apathetic or indifferent to pleasure, or that I do not fear pain. It means that I do not give up who I am for either one. Above all, do not give up on fraternity, on altruism. He will say that this is the most fundamental element, that if you take this away from a person, you take away their very humanity. When a person becomes selfish in order to possess something or out of fear of something, they have dehumanized themselves. They have paid too high a price. Whatever that thing may be, it is not worth it. This is an element that we should never relinquish among our principles. We will see that later on he speaks about this. Everything begins and ends with altruism. Everyone who wishes to grow must begin and end with altruism, which is the human condition par excellence. Continuing, he will also say that The Voice of the Silence, a work partially translated by Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, a 19th century philosopher, as well. She speaks of very similar precepts, which is also based on a Tibetan book, the Book of the Golden Precepts. And she will speak of things that are obstacles, of things that help to enumerate, as Buddhism likes to do, what is advisable and what is not. And one of the things these two books have in common is that one should never imagine that an instructor will walk the path for you, no matter how good they may be. The most they can do is point out the way to you. Buddha himself spoke about this. Look at the star my finger is pointing to, and not at my finger that points to the star. This creates a cult of personality and a weakness that, in general, is supported by a fantasy. Someone else will make me grow. No matter how special that being may be, they cannot do that. Helena Blavatsky often says that not even divine beings, for those who believe in them, can go against the waves of karma. Once you have generated the causes, the consequences are inexorable, and great beings are great because they understand this law. And they respect it, not because they override it. So, if you ask someone, once I let go of an object and ask that it not fall, no one can do that for you. There is a law of the universe that even the highest beings are subject to, which is the law of gravity. So, as the Bible says, sowing is free, but the harvest is mandatory. And therefore, what masters can do for you is teach you how to sow properly, but it is you who must do the sowing. This mentality of thinking that someone else will do things for us will never lead anyone to evolution. In fact, those who think this way usually want the benefits of evolution, but not the effort. That does not work. Nature has a just method, which gives to each one what corresponds to them. So, this is a common element in these two books, as well as in many others. He states that, indeed, in both works, and in most Tibetan Buddhist texts, there is the idea that an instructor is necessary. It is very difficult for someone to progress on the path of wisdom without someone to guide them, for a very simple reason. None of us would start studying medicine by practicing on a lizard in the garden and learning everything on our own. One would go to a medical school and draw upon the entire tradition that humanity has gathered, and begin from there. Human life is far more complex than any medical treatise accumulated throughout the history of humanity. Jung himself has a well-known saying, in which he states that it is easier for a person to start from scratch and build a spacecraft that takes them to the moon, than to start from scratch and construct a knowledge that leads them into the depths of themselves, because it is more complicated. Human nature is complex in every way we can imagine. So, evidently, we must inherit the knowledge that has been built in this field, just as we inherit knowledge in all things. We inherit in medicine, we inherit in aeronautical engineering, we inherit in electronic engineering. Everyone begins from where the previous generation left off. Therefore, here too, there must be an instructor, that which traditions call a master. But he says, look, one of the most complex things in modern times is to have someone to guide you, because there is no internal reference point for choosing. And what the world has most are pseudo-gurus, people offering miraculous methods, exploiting the naivety of others. He is Indian, therefore he can speak about this. He says, look, if there is a place where there are thousands of false gurus, it is in India. You run into 3 of them on every corner. As he said, this is his responsibility, but I believe it is true. So he asks, what criteria should we have in order to choose someone like that? He goes on to say, it is necessary to find an instructor with a degree of power and wisdom. Spiritual power is not the ability to produce phenomena. This is yet another element that we generally tend to think about. Powers, what are they? Does he avoid things? Does he read minds? He says, this is a result of materialism. Helena Blavatsky often says that a good action is one that meets a need, whether in the world or within ourselves. The world does not need chair levitation, it needs honesty. It does not need mind reading, it needs integrity. So, what must the master possess? These virtues, to a higher degree than yours, but with great discernment. Because if a person is on the ladder that leads the human being toward evolution, if they are 3 steps ahead of you, you already lose sight of them. He must be distant enough to serve as a reference for you, but close enough for you to understand and reach him. Do you understand this? So, in general, if you are here, your vanity will want you to have the Buddha as your master, or Confucius, or Lao Tzu. And the right person is the one who is a single step ahead of you, who knows the language that is appropriate so that you can understand, and whom you can still see. You do not lose faith that you can reach them, because they are close enough, just 1 step ahead of you. I usually mention this to my students in class, because some time ago, not that long ago, when Steve Jobs died, Shortly before he passed away, you may have heard that he said he would trade all of his work, everything he built, for 1 hour in the company of Socrates. Did you know that? You've heard about it, right? And I found it very curious when he said that. People were very surprised. I said, well, it is commendable on his part to think that way. But imagine if I decided to learn about electronics and said that the dream of my life was to become a disciple of Steve Jobs with the level of knowledge I have. What would he say to me? My dear, go to a computer school around the corner and learn the basics. Then, you go to a slightly better one, to a better one, and in 10 years, you show up around here. You don't have the level to be a direct disciple. In this matter, you have no right at all. Isn't that what he would say? However, he thinks he could be a disciple of Socrates. You see? His vanity would not allow him to be a disciple of someone who is just a bit more coherent and integral than he is, with a sense of purpose, a little more aligned, without loose ends, knowing where they want to go, with a greater level of self-mastery than his own. It simply would not allow it. So, this kind of vanity is one of the other elements that hinder the evolution of the human being. To be able to recognize a person who possesses the spirit of self-improvement, who has a certain commitment to always walk toward their principles, but who is not so far ahead that you lose sight of them. Now, he will explain how to recognize this master, who possesses these spiritual powers over himself, not phenomenal powers, sufficient to offer you something, to illuminate your path, but not to walk it for you. He says that the first thing to do is to know your own flaws and virtues, in essence, to have self-awareness. If you possess a basic level of self-awareness, you are able to recognize it in others as well. Those who also have a degree of self-awareness, otherwise, will be manipulated and fall into the hands of a guru. And a guru has a very interesting characteristic. He perceives what you want to hear and says it. And he holds you there, by your desires, by your weaknesses. There is an old saying that goes, take care of your flaws so that you are not exploited because of them. In other words, a guru is skilled at perceiving your vanity, at knowing what you want to hear. And those things you don't want to address, he will also notice. And if you are not aware of this, you become very easily manipulated. Notice how we are exploited, even without mentioning the relationships between masters and disciples in Tibet. In our daily lives, we are exploited because of our flaws. Take care of them so that you are not exploited. Do you remember the famous lottery ticket scam? Someone falls for it. Why is that? Greed, isn't it? Greed. There are people who exploit others knowing that greed is their weakness, otherwise, no one would fall for it. I've already told you about a case. Most of you have heard it, but for those who are new and don't yet know all my stories. I used to work in the Northeast, and there was a lady who worked there. She was a cleaning lady, a very good person, very honest, but very simple. And someone tried to pull the lottery ticket scam on her in the street. And she, the man, poorly dressed, all dirty, looking like a Sardinijo, approached her, wanting her to help him cash in that lottery ticket, offering her half of the winnings. She was outraged. Sir, I am a poor woman, but I am honest. Do you think I will want to steal half of your prize, if a poor man like you? I don't need that, no. What are you thinking? Then people started to gather around, making a commotion, and the police came to arrest the man. When she arrived at work and told us this story, she still hadn't understood what had happened. She didn't escape because of cleverness, she escaped because of her honesty. He tried to take advantage of a flaw she simply did not have. She was honest. Do you understand? I think that even today she hasn't understood what happened. She wanted us to go with her to the police station to help release the poor man. She said it had all been a misunderstanding, and the poor man had been arrested. She wasn't cunning or shrewd, she was honest. That weakness he tried to exploit simply wasn't there in her. This is interesting. I like this story because it taught me a lot. Just as even criminals possess a certain human psychology and know how to exploit that flaw you haven't managed to polish, that edge you haven't managed to smooth out. So, he says that those who seek wisdom without any self-knowledge will become easy prey. Sooner or later, they'll encounter some so-called guru who will exploit their vanity and feed their flaws. Therefore, self-knowledge is essential. If someone comes up to you and says, "Wow, you are such a pure person." No, not pure. You're talking about someone else. I know that I am not pure. I am well aware of the thoughts I have, so don't come to me with that empty talk. If I were pure, I wouldn't need you for anything. You can't manipulate me that way. I have a reasonable degree of self-knowledge. And then he will talk about this path of self-knowledge, self-perception, which is extremely necessary for anyone who wishes to begin walking the path of wisdom. He says that the human mind is complex. It is easy to deceive oneself and others. When we are children, our mothers tell us, "Do not deceive others," and we genuinely try our best not to deceive anyone. But the problem is that we deceive ourselves, so how could we not end up deceiving others? We do not really know who we are, so, logically, we will end up deceiving others. We do not know what comes out of this little box of surprises that is ourselves. Suddenly, we reveal a side of ourselves that we did not even know existed. So it is difficult not to mislead others when we are deceiving ourselves. And he says, we minimize our own faults by saying, "It is human, to err is human." That may be acceptable for you, but for the other, it is unforgivable. We are always minimizing, downplaying the importance of our own flaws while placing a tremendous burden on the flaws of others. That is the biblical phrase, isn't it? About the speck in your brother's eye and the plank in your own eye. In other words, we do not forgive the mistakes of others, but we are always minimizing our own. While we magnify the faults of others, we even invent or overestimate qualities that we do not possess. Thus, our self-assessment is very superficial. Are you going to say it is about virtues? On the other hand, our virtues may be nothing more than appearances, something that is advantageous to us. But this aspect is interesting because sometimes we are kind. Why is that? If I am kind, the people around me will shower me with favors. They will do everything I need when I require their help, or perhaps I am a merchant and this way I will attract many clients. That is not kindness. It is a superficial conditioning which is actually driven by self-interest. This is one of the things I always discuss with my audience. Be careful when people sometimes travel to first world countries and say how polite people are and how much they care for one another. I do not see so many truly altruistic people in today's world. What I see is good social conditioning, often motivated by vanity. The depth of truly being kind, because I am genuinely moved by the other, deeply, for who they are and for who I am. This is very rare anywhere in the world. We live in a time of great selfishness, and this is not just here, it is everywhere. So, even what we consider to be virtue sometimes has self-interest behind it. It is an appearance, a facade, a reputation, or some kind of return or advantage. It is not that deep, it lacks true motivation. And our actions must be coherent between motivations and effects, otherwise, they are not genuine. It is simply a thin veneer, offering little real coverage. And he says, we are constantly seeking a divinity that will forgive us and protect us from ourselves. That is curious, isn't it? There is even a poem by Lona Pessoa, a prayer, in which he ends by saying exactly that. Lord, protect me from myself. Now, just consider, with all the virtues that have been given to us as potential, generosity, imagination, willpower, God still has to do everything, even protect us from ourselves. In other words, we become a burden on the back of this God. Because we do not even take care of our own lives. We delegate this responsibility to Him and still consider ourselves virtuous for doing so. In other words, He carries us on His back, and yet we still see ourselves as virtuous because we are so faithful. This is the height of fleeing from responsibility for our own lives. We are so afraid because we know that if we open the little box of our identity, we will find things we do not know how to deal with. So, I do not open it and leave it for God to handle. Let Him protect me from myself. How can that be? And what is your role in existence? Who are you going to protect? if you do not even protect yourself. So, he says, it is common for the fear of self-knowledge to lead us to this kind of escape, and it is often even interpreted as a virtue. I have given my life to God. Look, have you put yourself at the service of God? Great, my congratulations. Or have you handed your life over for God to carry for you? Be careful. Are you running away from the responsibility of facing your own life and building it in the way it needs to be built? He then goes on to say, as I was mentioning to you, that India is full of these false instructors who know very well how to manipulate. They manipulate in search of fame and worldly possessions. This is one of the most curious things, my friends. Look, it is extremely easy to manipulate. We generally wear a very common mask in our current society, a mask of what we would like to be, but have not yet become, have not yet achieved. Or sometimes a mask that gives us social status. If someone wants to manipulate you, they pretend to see this mask, when in reality, they are seeing your true face. Because, in general, the only ones who believe in this mask are ourselves. No one else believes in it. If you ask a child, they might even tell you, it's just a mask. So, the one who wants to manipulate you pretends to see the mask, when in truth, they are seeing your real face. Wow, how organized I am, right? But actually, not organized at all, but let me flatter him. I want to get something from him. But everyone sees it. The ones who see themselves the least are ourselves. I often joke with my students and say, if you ask the doorman of your building, he knows whether you are organized. Then one of my students told me, I will go to my building in disguise and I will ask my doorman, who am I? To be able to gain more self-knowledge. Because it really is curious. The ones who believe in this mask the most are ourselves. To study the teachings of great sages and great schools of thought, seeking the truth in all of them. Existence is one of the characteristics of a true master. He will demand this from you. And this in itself is already a complicated element, because it will require you to let go of thinking you know, to let go of dogmatism, of the need to affiliate yourself with one thing by giving up all the others. They say, look, great masters of wisdom, much has been done in their name afterwards, but they themselves were not affiliated with just one thing. They saw traces of wisdom throughout the entire universe. Wherever there are traces of values, of anything, of wisdom, it is our inheritance. So why would I stop learning? So, the master of wisdom will not come to you and say, no, the Egyptians, I will not study because those strange people, animal worshippers, such odd things, what a zoological theology, I will not study those people. Well, all right, but then you have lost your condition as a philosopher. Because the philosopher seeks wisdom wherever it may be, on the other side of time, on the other side of the world, and draws all that knowledge as his own inheritance. It's like a doctor saying, I will not study medicine. In the United States, because they don't like Americans, they're imperialists. All right, but there have been many advances in medicine in the United States. If you refuse to learn, you will remain an incomplete doctor. If you truly love medicine, you will seek out this knowledge, wherever it may be found. Philosophy is the same way. A true teacher will offer you a comparative study of all the good that humanity has built throughout history, and will not tolerate prejudice. No, not this. Why not this? Why can't you learn from these people, from this era, from this tradition, from this teacher? Why do you reject this heritage? You will undertake a comprehensive comparative study and will not accept dogmatism. In other words, this flexibility is already a difficult and rare quality to possess. So, here are some suggestions that this treatise offers about what a true teacher would ask of you. And he says, one of the fundamental things that will be required of you by a true teacher is that you maintain, at all times, a vigilant awareness over your thoughts, emotions, actions, and speech. And don't think that this will make you neurotic, constantly monitoring everything I am doing. It is a natural attribute of the human being. To be relaxed, to be well, without anxiety, and yet, at the same time, to observe oneself. He says that, in our historical moment, especially for the West, this is the form of meditation to which humanity should dedicate itself. to observe one's own thoughts, to see what one is thinking and why one is thinking it, not to deceive oneself, to know what one thinks, to know what one feels, to know what one does, not to shy away from seeing oneself clearly. For this, it requires that one have an identity that stands above thought, in such a way that one sees one's thoughts and emotions as one sees one's physical body, as tools. And to observe the gears, the mechanism of how all this operates. To discover the true motivations that lie behind one's actions. He says that this is fundamental. And after you discover these mechanisms, these gears, there is an entire discipline to prevent them from triggering certain automatic actions that go against your principles. Our international director, Professor Delia Steinberg-Guzman, has a phrase that I find very interesting. She says that discipline is doing what is necessary to keep your consciousness elevated. You have to realize, and he will mention this shortly here, that there are certain environments, and even in biology this is discussed. You create certain conditions where, for example, a bacterium cannot survive. It is not suitable for that kind of life. This applies on all levels. You create certain conditions in your mind, in your emotions, when you observe them, when you get to know them, that are not conducive to certain thoughts you do not wish to have. And these conditions can be a daily reflection, a piece of music that elevates your consciousness, a constant state of thinking about something that inspires you. Discipline is doing what is necessary to keep your consciousness elevated. And doing it daily. He will talk about this. So he says, this is not an overexertion. Unless you become anxious, this is not an overexertion. You can remain relaxed throughout your life and, at the same time, observe yourself. And this is meditation in our historical moment. To see what is happening within you and to discover the mechanisms, the true motivations, the hidden engines that are behind it all. Look at what he says. Constant observation, a mental state of alertness, combined with humility. A mind that draws conclusions quickly will fall into positivity or dogmatism. Let us proceed calmly, addressing one thing at a time, because there is a lot summarized here. Have you ever stopped to ask yourselves why we believe in certain things, but when it comes time to act, we do not act in accordance with them? I find this to be something deeply unsettling. I believe in the Platonic concept of justice, which is to give each one what is due to them, according to their nature and their actions. Oh, how beautiful. I think that's beautiful. I love it. But when it comes time to act, I do nothing that has anything to do with that. Don't you feel a restless doubt, wanting to know why we do not live in a way that is consistent with the things we believe in? When it comes time to act, do we do something else? This is one of the great restlessnesses of the human being. And now, drumroll, I will do the great revelation for you all about why we do not act. Why don't we practice the things we believe in? Do you know why? Because we have a mental slush fund, a hidden compartment in our minds. Are you aware of this wisdom? All of us have a mental and emotional slush fund, which stays well hidden. But when it comes time to act, it is this hidden part that commands our actions, not that beautiful, theoretical self, standing on a stage under the spotlight. It's not that ideal self, it's the hidden slush fund that takes over. Let me give you a practical example. Here in Lago Norte, we have a characteristic that you all know well, the traffic jam on the Braguetto Bridge. The traffic jam on the Braguetto Bridge. You're right there in the middle of it. You know exactly what I mean, don't you? All of us do. You're stuck in the middle of the jam, hoping for a little space, everything at a standstill, and you're letting others go ahead, that whole mess. Then suddenly, you hit the gas and cut in, forcing your way to the front. Look, Plato would not recommend doing that. Plato recommends that human beings act as human beings, exercising self-control. But you know what? In this situation, it has to be my way. Plato, in his time, didn't have traffic jams. He traveled by chariot, he walked. When have you ever seen a chariot stuck in traffic? No. Here, Plato does not know our current reality. In this circumstance, I'm the one who knows how things should be done. It has to be my way. Isn't that so? This is the Kaisha Tuv mindset. When to act? No, not here, my way. Plato doesn't work. He's outdated. They didn't have this in his time. Did Plato have an annoying boss? He didn't. He didn't even have a boss. If he had my boss, he would know that here, things have to be done differently. In other words, this is the Kaisha Tuv mindset. Then everything goes wrong. Life turns upside down. You end up making a lot of enemies, getting into arguments in traffic. Do you know what we should do? At a certain moment, in a daily reflection, bring this into the light. Because the Kaisha too is always hidden away. Bring it into the light. Look, right here. If I had done as Plato recommended, wouldn't things have turned out better? They would have. So, does Plato apply to the traffic jam on the Brigitte Bridge? He does. Does he help in dealing with my boss? He does. It would have been much better if I had done it his way. So you, cashier, are lying to me. Your little tricks don't work. Bring to light these hidden motivations, which are tucked away in the crevices of our subconscious. And when we act, it is these motivations that are in control, so that you don't see them. When you look, you don't see what's hidden there. You don't know what you think. Do you notice that? Throughout the day, you don't know what it was that you thought. What was it that guided your actions? We are so inattentive. I've already told you many times about an exercise I did here at this center, even with some of my students. I asked them, "Are you critical?" No, no one was critical. It was a large group, and there wasn't a single critical person among them. It was something rare. Then I said, "Take a notepad home. Every time you have a critical thought tomorrow, make a mark on a piece of paper. That little mark where you make a square and then cross a line through it, and then another. A square, then a line through the middle." The following week, they said, "Professor, I couldn't do anything because I spent the whole time marking up that notepad." Then I said, "All right, for next week, you're going to try to cut out all critical thoughts. All right, every time a critical thought comes up, stop it and replace it with something positive." The following week, they said, "Look, I ended up with a mental void. I had nothing left to think about, because everything I thought was criticism. So, I started to turn more outward, to notice the details of the place where I work. I had never noticed that there was a molding on the ceiling at my workplace, and I've worked there for 10 years. I started paying attention to the things I was doing, because I couldn't allow myself to think critically. So I turned outward and paid more attention to things. I did everything so well that day. Now, do you know what that is? This exercise was very interesting for me, and for the whole group. No one knew what they thought about during a day. I hadn't seen it. Isn't that curious? Our lack of self-knowledge reaches this point. You don't know what we're thinking. Don't you see? Unnoticed person. Check these things. Bring these things to light. See the gears behind it. Because, in the end, what will make your actions valuable is the right motivation behind the right act. When, behind the scenes, there is a mechanism manipulating things for personal gain, the act is stripped of value and, in fact, its consequences are very short-lived. You will notice this. This is action and reaction. If I pour water on the floor, it will get the floor wet. It is inevitable. If today I act with selfishness, tomorrow my life will be contaminated by selfishness and by people being selfish with me. Ah, but I had such good intentions. No, you did not. Look at the workings of your mind and see what the starting point was back then. See yourself. See what is moving within you. Bring your motivations to light. And then you begin to create an environment where this kind of motivation, now that you have seen it, you have more power, where this kind of motivation does not have much energy to prevail. This is a mental environment, one of elevated ideas, of beauty. As she says, create an environment where this does not develop, as if it were a culture in which certain bacteria cannot grow. He will speak more about this later on. And then he will say, constant observation, this mental state of alertness, observing oneself, combined with humility, which is one of the most complex virtues to understand. Humility is almost like a perpetual vigilance, so that things are not manipulated by selfishness. So, you must always make sure that you act for humanity, that you act out of love, that you act with a spirit of service. Humility is not humiliation, nor is it an inferiority complex, It is a guarantee that we do things not only for ourselves, but for humanity. When people say that philosophy is self-help, I say, if there is one thing philosophy is not, it is self-help, because there is already too much self-help in the world. Philosophy helps the other. It is about thinking a little less about yourself and more about humanity, committing yourself to humanity. Enough. There is too much self-help in the world. Help the other to think a little less about themselves. Once, something happened to me that I found very funny. Silly things, but these little things help us remember. One of my students, I really like mythology, started asking me 1,000 questions about the god Pan. Do you know some of the attributes of the god Pan? I started to talk. I enjoy the subject, but after a while, I got curious. Why are you so interested in the god Pan? Oh, because I went to register my car and those letters came up on my license plate. Pan. Since it appeared on my plate, he is a very special god. He is. He emerged from the anonymity of Greek mythology and became special just because he appeared on your license plate. In other words, you are someone who gives importance even to the gods. He became the god of license plates. I found that curious. How we are always so focused on our own personality. What concerns us has exceptional value. The rest is worth nothing. Humility is a guardian to prevent you from falling into this alienation. So that you turn outward and truly wish to listen, to feel, to see things, to see people, so that you look around a little. And wish to see a reality other than your own face in the mirror. Here, humility is a guarantee that your actions are motivated by something genuine. It will tell you, look, be careful when linking thought to thought, emotion to emotion, so that selfishness does not slip in. Because the most common thing is quick thinking, which we value in our society, it is an overly assertive and, in general, dogmatic way of thinking. I keep imagining how that blessed Socrates would sit down to have dialogues in Greece. Do you know about this? Socrates was a philosopher who enjoyed engaging in dialogues. He would sit with his disciples without knowing where the conversation would end up. The dialogue. Let's talk about love. He sought to find answers in the perceptions and intuitions of his disciples. He would weave these together, building a conclusion that even he did not know at the outset. At the beginning, can you imagine that? When we talk to people today, you notice that they are just waiting for you to stop speaking so they can unload everything they've already memorized inside themselves, everything they have already stored within them. There is no real listening. And this happens in any subject. People are entrenched in their own opinions. It is very difficult to let go of this habitual way of thinking and truly see the other person. They might be bringing you something exceptional, something you have never seen before. And did this person offer you the opportunity to understand that? Professor Michel Echenique, who brought New Acropolis to Brazil, had a habit of doing something. He would stand in a very special way, just standing still, whenever someone asked him a question. He has since passed away, but he was an exceptional person. And one day, driven by my curiosity, I went to ask him about it. Every time someone asks you something, what exactly are you doing? Why do you stand in that position, looking down at the ground like that? And he told me, I pause my mind, because otherwise, I can't truly feel the person. I don't know what they really want. I just end up projecting my own thoughts onto them. So I pause my mind, holding it back to keep it quiet. That way, I could truly feel the person. I found that exceptional. And it truly is. So, this is the element at play, the mind that draws conclusions too quickly, which is something we tend to value greatly. Nowadays, in general, it pours out onto others its already formed, rigid, dogmatic ideas. It does not listen, and therefore, it loses the opportunity to learn. I have already learned exceptional things from my students, even those coming to their very first class. And I carry that with me for the rest of my life. And the human being is a mystery and has so much to teach us. So, humility, as he will say, is not a conditioning, nor a complex, but a state of mind and heart. In other words, it is not an inferiority complex, which we often confuse with humility, nor is it a conditioning to appear simple. It is something natural, where you recognize that you do not know everything, and that the other has so much to offer you. The other is a treasure. Human beings are precious minds, as the Indian Ramayana said. I am curious to understand the other. When you love, you do this with great ease. A child comes home, for those who are fathers or mothers, arrives with those drawings they make, and you are genuinely interested in looking at them. To know what they thought, what they felt, what they expressed there. They bring those little seeds they picked up on the street, that tiny flower. You are truly interested in that. At least, if you are a good father or a good mother that has your complete attention, you keep those scribbles, those little seeds, for years on end. It is an expression of the feelings of someone I love. This turns you outward, opens your heart to perceive things. Imagine if we were like this all the time. How much would we learn? He says, this humility is a fundamental quality, because someone highly educated can still be just a fool. They may have only information, but lack the openness to truly penetrate the mystery of another. Therefore, they do not renew themselves. They are stagnant water. Only information, only the horizontal. This phrase comes from the voice of the silence, a very beautiful one, which says the following: be humble when seeking wisdom, and be even more humble when you attain it. I find this very beautiful. If you compare a mere intellectual, an informed person, and a wise person, it is said that the intellectual, the more intellectual he becomes, the more vain he is. And the wise person, the wiser he becomes, the more humble he is. He already glimpses the universe of things that exist to be known and that he does not yet know, and he compares himself to that, and says, I only know that I know nothing. To say, I only know that I know nothing, is already an act of wisdom. He glimpses how much there is to be known. The vain person glimpses nothing. He has a tiny little world and thinks that is all there is. So, humility, he says, is a fundamental condition in any system that proposes for humanity to walk toward wisdom, toward the human ideal. Wisdom is the appropriate response to life, seeking what is right in thoughts and reactions. And then he returns a bit to that subject we were discussing, creating a mental atmosphere. Plato speaks a great deal about this. The divine bones have set a meeting with your soul every day. Keep a journal, create a moment of reflection where you play that music which, when you listen to it, elevates your conscience. Or read that text which, when you read it, uplifts your conscience, or engage in a moment of reflection. This is truly remarkable, everyone. When you reflect and arrive at a profound conclusion that can serve as fuel, sometimes, for an entire week of elevated consciousness. It is very interesting. You need to evoke these elements, you need to provoke them, because when you reach this state of consciousness, you begin to create an environment that is inhospitable to selfish ideas and base feelings. The sacred and the profane cannot coexist in the same space. So, when you create an elevated mental atmosphere, you automatically purify your psyche, making it no longer suitable for certain mental forms. To dwell there. Sufism, which is an Islamic tradition, is the sages of the original Islamic tradition lived in a state of perpetual mental prayer, which they called dhikri. That which was most sacred, most noble to them, they would repeat mentally all the time. For what purpose? To purge and drive away all the phantoms, as if it were a St. Francis figurehead, to ward off evil spirits. You place within your mind a figurehead, which is what? A noble thought, an elevated melody, a prayer, an image, a moment, a reflection. And this, little by little, creates a mental atmosphere. And maintaining this is an act of discipline, which ensures that, more and more, you gain mastery on this plane. You begin to take it for yourself. It is no longer random. The mind becomes your tool. But it is a slow process, one that requires patience, step by step. It is a habit that is gradually acquired. Thus, wisdom is the appropriate response to life, seeking what is right in thoughts and reactions. You build this, day by day, identifying what you are amidst all that you are not. Compassion, love, a spirit of service to humanity, in both thought and action. He uses a phrase from Helena Blavatsky. Wisdom is altruism, first and last. Wisdom is altruism, first and last. Where does selfishness fit in? There, ignorance comes in as well. Therefore, we must look within ourselves to see what mechanisms are driving our actions in the world, to discern what is genuine and what is merely an appearance. This is very common nowadays, isn't it? Only the external is considered, so any social conditioning is already seen as a virtue in a person, due to a lack of depth. When we do not recognize ourselves in a profound way, we also fail to truly recognize others. To uncover the mechanisms, to observe thoughts and emotions outside of oneself, and to discover our true motivations. This is a kind of meditation that is much more challenging than simply acquiring information. He says this, and I truly believe it. Read the most complex books in the world, understand the most exotic equations that technology has created, and then try to master your own thoughts. You will see that this is much more difficult. The greatest mystery of the universe is the human being. And the person who is able to delve within themselves and say, this thought is mine, this one is not, this one I will nurture, this one I will cut away, to have mastery over their own tools, to guide their actions so that they do not. In our historical moment, we tend to think that doing many things is like leaving many footprints in the sand. Sometimes, those footprints are in circles. To truly accomplish much is to leave the right footprints, in the right direction, moving upward in a straight line. So, the person who is able to select, to discern, to choose among their inner thoughts and impulses, this is the greatest act of intelligence, to select within oneself what truly belongs to them and what does not, and to gradually purge and purify these elements, is a task that demands extraordinary perseverance and intelligence beyond the ordinary. And it is more difficult than any mathematical equation that humanity has ever managed to develop. Therefore, it holds an equivalent merit, the construction of oneself. Mental serenity versus an army of ideas, like the Hydra of Lerna that I mentioned earlier, is just like that. You try to simply cut off one thought. Two more arise in its place. Do you remember that the Hydra was like this? You cut off the Hydra's head and 2, 3, or even 4 more grow back, and it never stops. That's it. Then Iolaus, who assisted Hercules, came with a torch of fire. Only the fire of noble, elevated, luminous, and upright thoughts, which gradually fill the space of these negative thoughts, can prevent the heads of the Hydra of Lerna from growing back. You must occupy the space that opens up. Take an interest in noble things, seek out that which elevates your consciousness, create a discipline, a habit of life, a refinement of taste. By the way, this is a phrase from Sri Ram. Evolution is nothing more than the refinement of taste. Take an interest in that which is fire, luminous, upright, and transformative. That is, there is the music of fire, the idea of fire, the feeling of fire. Learn to recognize these and cultivate them. And gradually rebuild yourself, step by step, for it was a mental climate unsuitable for the Hydra. Here is the drawing by our friend Santizio Peri. He says that temporary immobility is not mental stability. I am not thinking anything negative right now. That's good, I controlled myself. No. The vulgar and coarse ideas are just hiding there. When someone provokes you, they will leap out, just like the boa constrictor in the digestion process he mentioned. It absorbed a lot of things and is just lying there. When you are provoked, that's what jumps out. Inactivity does not mean virtue. Virtue is when all the circumstances in the world provoke you, and you respond as a human being. That would be true wisdom. It seems kind of obvious, doesn't it? We walk down the street, the little dog barks at us. Do we bark back at the little dog? No, he is a dog, I am a human being. He acts like a dog, I act like a human being. We should be like this in relation to all circumstances. Circumstances arise, and I respond as a human being. They do not have the power to make me abdicate my human condition, and this means that I have mastery over my psyche. Otherwise, you are in a momentary state of instability, which means nothing. It is like a boa constrictor in the process of gestating your psyche. It will manifest at any moment. A serene mind, free from the grooves of habit, sensitive to meaning. Automatisms must be watched so as not to generate undesirable effects in our minds and emotions. He says automatism, habit, something you will not be able to banish completely. Imagine if I had to walk while paying attention to every single step I take. Wouldn't that be an exhausting task? To get from here to the door, observing my muscles, I have the habit of moving my legs and I don't even notice how it happens. It's a complex process, you know. You create an imbalance, move forward, and then regain your balance. To drive, imagine if every day you had to pay attention to all those movements, all of that. Well, at our current stage of evolution, there are certain habits, certain automatisms that are necessary. You can't do without them because they save you a lot of energy. But be careful, because automatisms are acceptable on the physical level. But when you start to act automatically on the emotional and mental planes, that's not acceptable. That is not the right approach for those levels. Every time someone provokes me, I react in the same way. Every time I see something, I think about it in the same way. Well, that's not acceptable. We should not allow automatisms on the mental and emotional planes. They are entering a realm that does not belong to them, so we must be careful with what is said. This is to ensure that certain automatisms of the body do not affect your soul, your thoughts, or your emotions. For example, that person who becomes sad whenever the weather turns cloudy. Why is that? That is an automatism. It gets cloudy and I become sad. How does that make sense? I am the master of my own feelings. I cannot allow myself to be subject to weather conditions, can I? Or to certain cycles of the month, for example, in women's lives, as we know. Every time I go through them, I become unbearable. No, wait a minute. One thing is biology, another is psychology. Why does one have to influence the other? If I know that's the reason, certain people, when they eat heavy foods, have a hard time digesting and become irritable. What does your digestion have to do with your mood? Aren't these two different planes? And if you know that's what's causing it, why not break the cycle? Why will I create misunderstandings, treat people poorly, just because of my digestion? Digestion is the stomach. I am not my stomach. Do you understand? Be careful with automatisms and the influences they generate on the psyche. The psyche cannot be automated. It is our ground for creating our human identity. It cannot be automated. And to perceive where these influences exist. Empty mental and emotional habits and preferences. In other words, habit is not meant to enter the mental or emotional plane. There, everything must be chosen for a profound reason. I observed, I reflected, and I decided to feel this. I observed, I reflected, and I decided to think this. There must be initiative, action, and not reaction. So, watch over and eliminate these mental habits and preferences. The mind becomes pure and illuminates the true nature of things. So, if I am not a dogmatic automaton running the software of life, my mind is clean, it is crystalline. And I begin to look at things and see them in depth. Then I am able to see myself, to see others, and to know what is and what is not, to have discernment. A process of evolution begins. The ordinary mind is a mixture of envy, lust, hatred, greed, and so on. It is an accumulation of elements that come from below, not from above, completely contaminated by these mechanisms, by desires, by fears, by repulsion and attraction. Memory is replaced by vision. Understand this. It is as if you were to make a clay vessel to drink water. All right, the clay was excellent. It allowed you to build this vessel. Now, you will no longer drink with your hands. You have a vessel. But once you have made the vessel, you are not going to drink all your water from it while it's still dirty with clay. Are you? Dirty with clay? Wash it, clean it. The clay belongs to the past, but now it can no longer be. Otherwise, it contaminates my water. Memory is like this. It helped me build certain structures so that today I am better prepared for life. But it cannot contaminate my present in such a way that every time I look at something, I think, I've already experienced a situation like this, and I judge based on my memory. I no longer see anything new. I no longer learn anything new. I just keep projecting my memory onto the present. So, I end up living according to what was, and not what is. How can anyone seek wisdom in this way? Is philosophy the love of wisdom? It presumes that you do not yet possess it, otherwise you would not be searching. If you think you have already seen everything, then everything that appears before you, you will label and not truly see. This is the problem of a person who is a prisoner of the past, of memory. Memory builds structures that you use, but if you judge the world through it, you will not grow. You will always be labeling. So, memory is replaced by vision, a clear vision, as if seeing something for the first time, as if it were the first day of your life, as Marcus Aurelius says. And finally, the pure mind of beings is inseparable from the one mind. In other words, it is said that there exists a great mind, the great intelligence that built the universe. And when you cleanse yourself of all these contaminations, you become a terminal of it, as lucid and as capable of creating as it is. Beings become digits of God, terminals of the one mind. 1. When they remove all the obstructions of selfishness that stand in the way, and penetrate deeply into the hearts of beings. And this is wisdom. Pure joy is born from within and fills the being. In other words, from the moment we do this, we attain the joy and happiness that rightfully belong to us as human beings. He says, look, you may not have fully understood these things I spoke about, but reflect on them. Bring these things into your heart and reflect upon them. Because what I am saying is not simply a theory. It is meant to help you live. I am giving you a bit of practical knowledge. Teaching is practical and points to the best. Way to live. Embrace a little solitude with your heart. Engage in a dialogue with yourself and see how this works within you. Use this. I am not telling you to acquire a theory or yet another theory from Sri Ram. I am telling you to observe and see this working within yourself, and to make this observation a tool to respond, to break free from mechanical living, and to be born as an authentic being, and to begin to take the reins of your own life. So, this is the Precept of the Masters, a Tibetan treatise. As I told you, this is just the very beginning. For anyone who wants to start walking the path of wisdom, this is the ABCs. Afterwards, I can't even imagine what will come next. It must be complicated. Because this already is. It is an element for us to begin reflecting and to see if we can find these things within ourselves. Knowledge becomes our own. When you look within yourself and see the gears that are hidden inside your psyche, your true motivations. One must find them. One must see them. This is the starting point. That is it. Any questions? Any doubts?